Well, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
I'm Charles Overby, chairman of the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics, and I want to welcome you to what I know is going to be an evening of interesting, informative, insightful conversation. If I had to pick three people, and actually I did have to pick three people, these would be the three I would pick to have a conversation with about literary things. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a couple of brief comments about the Overby Center. It was developed in order to attract the best and the brightest, to have civilized conversations about interesting and important things. And your being here tonight validates the purpose of that. And I wouldn't want to go any further in this program without recognizing the person who designed and oversaw the building of this facility. He's Larry Adama from Nashville. Will you stand up, Larry? Yeah. All of you are special, and I'm certainly glad you came, but I want to give a special welcome to the friends of Andrea and mine from Nashville. There are 17 couples here from Nashville. They could go anywhere they wanted to in the world. They get together once a year, and they chose Oxford to come to. And so I think they've made a good decision. Tonight, our conversation is going to talk about the literary traditions of Oxford. And I thought, as I was designing this program, that maybe it was a little redundant. That it would be like talking about the Catholic tradition at the Vatican. That everybody knows there's a literary tradition, so why bother? And I thought about it, and I said, we are so immersed. Like this week, we had this wonderful conference for the book. And it was all about literary, but it was, it didn't really step back to see Oxford's role in literary traditions. So the three panelists we have here tonight are going to help us dissect how and why Oxford is such a central part of a literary tradition here. Our first person we're going to talk to is Richard Howorth. Everybody knows Richard. Even if he hadn't actually been mayor of Oxford, we would refer to him as the mayor of Oxford. You know he owns Square Books.
I think that's Ron Shapiro.
Okay. And he was the mayor. He's now a member of the Tennessee Valley Authority. And afterwards, I'd like to talk to you about my electric bill.
Okay, we can do that.
But, you know, nobody gets better press in the state of Mississippi than Richard Howorth. Worldwide, you read, you can pick up anything, New York Times, New Yorker, Vanity Fair, The Guardian, anything, and they'll invariably, if they're going to focus on somebody from Mississippi, and particularly about books, they quote Richard. And I've read so many profiles about Richard and his and Lisa's great hospitality and what they do to bring authors to Oxford. It's really remarkable. And so, Richard, first I would ask you, why did you decide to come back here and open up Square Books? And has it been what you thought it would be, or has it been a lot better or a lot worse?
First, let me say, Charles, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this Overby Center, which has been such a great facility for our community, where those of us, not just students and faculty, but those of us who live in the community have an opportunity to hear these interesting conversations that you and your folks put together. It's just a wonderful asset to this community. I grew up in Oxford, and it was kind of a idle topic of dinner table conversation as to why Oxford didn't have a bookstore, and so it had been, the idea of a bookstore in Oxford had been in the back of my mind for a long time. I had an older brother who was very well read, and at one point wrote off, I think he was in high school, wrote off to the U.S. Department of Commerce and got a pamphlet on how to open a bookstore, and that was kind of lying around the house for a while. And so it would have been in the back of my mind for a long time. The American Booksellers Association recommended not opening a bookstore in a community of less than 40,000 people, which we didn't. I mean, when we first opened the store, there were, university and city, county together, or maybe 20 or 25,000. But I knew because of Faulkner and because of the university, we could cheat on that. I had read something somewhere else that said if you can identify 12 families in your community that are readers and book buyers, you might be able to make a go of it. And I could count those 12 families, 13, maybe 14. And so Lisa and I had been together. We had been together for a while. She had went to graduate school in Chapel Hill in library science, and it was about that time I'd been putting her through school and working, doing odd things. And I decided that if I was going to try a bookstore, I ought to get some experience. So Lisa and I together worked in an old bookstore in Washington, D.C. Lisa's a native of the D.C. area, and she knew this store. And so we worked in a place called the Saville Bookshop, which was in Georgetown on P Street, 3236 P Street, right off Wisconsin, and worked there for a couple of years. It was owned by a guy named Wallace Kuralt, who was Charles Kuralt's brother, who owned the Intimate Bookshops in North Carolina. And they were going through hard times at the time we began working there. And eventually the business had to close, but that experience was a terrific experience. So there's no experience in business like working for one that's having a real hard time. You learn how much you can extend your credit limit or not, and all sorts of other things. And so after working there for 2 years, we had saved $10,000. We came back to Oxford and opened in the upstairs above where Square Books Junior is today. There had been a real estate agent, a lawyer, and a insurance agent up there renting that building upstairs, the upstairs portion, for $40, $30, and $30 a month. So I rented that property for $100 a month, which was wonderful, but it was on the second floor. I had no street level visibility. And anyway, that's kind of how we got started. The business for many, many reasons grew well and organically. 6 years later, we were able to get on the ground floor and do bigger things. But from the very beginning, we had extremely loyal support from the people in Oxford and the university. It's really the same thing. You can't, they're joined at the hip. And
one magazine said that by the mid-1990s, Square Books had helped establish Oxford's reputation as a literary hub. Did you have that as a goal when you started?
No, it's, there's no motivation like the fear of failure. And so all I knew was I was going to have a hard time making it go. I was undercapitalized. I had a poor location, but I knew that people in Oxford would know where I was, and I knew they would support me. I didn't know that it would, grow in the way it did, but I certainly expected it to grow. And as I say, I got a lot of help. Within the first year we opened, Willie Morris came to town the following spring. He brought a lot of his friends. The same summer Lisa and I moved back here was when Bill Ferris moved here to be the first head of the Center for the Study of Southern Culture. Bill was, he's so charismatic. He has these blue eyes, and he looked me in the face and he says, we're going to do great things. And I was like, okay. and Bill, Bill says that sort of stuff, but he believes it. And a lot of times he's right. And so Bill was the one who brought Alice Walker and Alex Haley and Allen Ginsberg to our store. It was through his connection. Willie brought his Paris Review and Harper's connections, George Plimpton, William Styron, Shelby Foote, many. And so in the earliest days, we were having a lot of really great events, and as I say, getting a lot of support from the community.
It's great. Well, of course, bringing all those internationally known writers to Oxford helps build the literary tradition of Oxford.
Right.
But the other thing that it plays such an important role is the number of writers who live here. And there have been a lot of famous writers in and out of here, some of whom died. But Oxford is blessed to have what I now call a rock star couple, Beth Ann Fennelly and her husband, Tom Franklin. And
which is not Neil.
No, that's right. Sorry, Tom. But it really is true. They are not only have a great national reputation, but they're willing to lend their support to aspiring writers. Beth Ann could live anywhere, and Tom could. She was born in New Jersey, grew up in Chicago, educated at Notre Dame, got her MFA at the University of Arkansas, but chose to come here to Oxford. So first question I ask you, Beth Ann, why Oxford?
Oxford is a dream place for a writer to live. It's one place where the average person believes in the cultural currency of books, that people in this town still read and talk about books, and I can't imagine another town like that, really. So we moved here in 2001 when Tommy was offered the John and Renee Grisham Writer in Residence. So we're very grateful to the sponsorship of the Grishams, and it was just supposed to be a year-long appointment, and we moved here with our first child. She was 2 months old at the time, and fell in love, and I knew I never wanted to live anyplace else, and recently we just bought 5 plots in the cemetery down from Faulkner.
Whoa!
Wow.
Oh, that's
Yes.
that's major planning.
It's major commitment, yes. So I think that it's perhaps a possibility that we won't go anyplace else.
Well, that's wonderful. Now, Beth Ann leads the creative writing division in the English department and has a lot of aspiring students who want to follow in her footsteps and in Tom's footsteps. What do you tell them? I mean, is it totally ludicrous for students today to think that they could make a living or could succeed as writers, or are you able to encourage them in a realistic way?
It's no more ludicrous than it ever was. And I was just rereading some haiku by Issa, who is a Japanese haiku writer living in the 1800s, and he was running a haiku school out of his house, and the same complaints were happening, that people were wondering if there was any future in it, and would the students be imitative of their mentors, and it's just the same conversation, different locale, but as always, the human soul has hungered for meaning, and what writers do is look at the world and the flux of events and try to shape an arc that creates meaning, and as long as there are humans who have hearts, we'll never not need that gift.
Now, you established your national reputation as a poet.
Yes, sir.
But then you went on and became an essayist, and now you've co-written a novel with Tom. Which of those genres is the more difficult? Which one are you the most comfortable in?
I think as soon as I feel comfortable in something, I switch. But I wanted my whole life to be a poet, and then I did write 3 books, and so I should have kept doing that. Because finally, people understood that that's what I was doing. But I just feel like as long as you're interested and compelled by something and learning from it, that's the key. And so Tommy and I started talking about the flood of the Mississippi River in 1927 and how this was a great Southern story that more people should know about. And it's kind of a long story, but he kind of tricked me into writing a novel with him. And so that was really fun. And I accidentally wrote a book of essays about motherhood that were letters to a former student, and I didn't mean to write that, but that was really fun. And now I'm writing micro memoirs, 1 paragraph long stories about my life. And so I should have written another novel, being that the last one was a novel, but I'm just having so much fun. I tend to think it can't be a bad thing to be enjoying yourself.
That's good. I can't imagine Beth Ann co-writing a novel. Now, my wife Andrea, who is here, she and I struggled to write an annual Christmas letter together. So how is it that you could possibly write a whole book with your husband?
Well, it wasn't easy, and it took us 4 years, which is a long time for two people. I mean, that's 8 years, you know? And so the first thing I learned was writing a novel with another person doesn't mean you do it in half the time, you know? It took us a long time to figure it out, and there was so much research to do. And we also had to figure out how to work with each other. So Tommy and I had both published 4 books at this point, and then we were doing this new thing together, and we ended up composing aloud, which is a thing that I had never done before. We called it dueling laptops, but we'd be kneecap to kneecap with our laptops, and we'd talk sentences aloud to each other. And so that was a really fun new thing that I had never done before, but it did take a long time, and the stakes were high. You know, 4 years each, 2 people. Like if it fails, that's gonna make for a bad Christmas card.
Yeah. So Andrea, the technique next Christmas, kneecap to kneecap.
Yeah.
She's okay on that. Neil White's somebody else who could live anywhere. He has his own publishing company. He's an author and a playwright, and he's chosen Oxford. I'm gonna get him to tell why, but before that, most of you know Neil's story, but I was reading his a line from his biography online, and it said, just matter-of-factly, he has been a newspaper editor, magazine publisher, advertising executive, and federal prisoner. I told somebody the other day, you'd look at Neil White and you'd say, well, he'd never be in prison. So you did go to prison, and from that, I guess it changed your life. You said that it gave you a gift of time. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. I do want to say that my younger brother suggested tattooing Neil and Love on my fingers when I was in prison, but I passed on that.
Not too late, Neil.
That's true.
You know?
That's true. It's interesting listening to Richard talk about the literary heritage of Oxford. I had lived here before, had a weekly newspaper, and had really not thought about writing anything because the fact of the matter is I didn't have anything to say. I was a journalist, and I was friends with Willie and was lucky enough to spend a lot of time with him because he had a crush on my mother, so I was asked to all the parties, and Alex Haley actually changed my son's diaper when he was 1 in the backseat of Willie's car. So we have some great stories from that era, but I was always on the periphery. I was looking at business and entrepreneurship and that sort of thing, and I was a terrible business person. I don't know why the hell I went through English and decided to go into business, but I did, and ended up at age 31 violating some federal banking regulations and was sentenced to 1 year in prison. And so essentially, it wasn't about greed for me or money. I was terrified of failure, much like Richard mentioned, but I went to great lengths to cover it up. And I wanted everybody to think I had it together. I created this facade of perfection and spent an amazing amount of money and time and energy to do it. For those of you who don't know, I was sent to an experimental prison that was a federal prison / leper colony. The last 130 leprosy patients in America were there. So I found myself standing in front of a woman who'd been there for 68 years because she was susceptible to a bacterial infection, and I was there for a year for mishandling $1 million, and it was pretty much impossible to muster up self-pity in that. So the long story short is, what are the odds of a guy who cared nothing but about his outward image going to the one place in America where outward image meant nothing? And so when I came back to Oxford, I finally had this story to tell. And I started taking creative writing classes, and the first one I signed up for was Barry Hanna's class, and he is a fantastic writer, but he's a better teacher. I promise you, nobody could talk about the art of writing like he did. Then I signed up for Steve Yarbrough's class. I signed up for Tommy Franklin's class. I was learning everything I could about how to tell this story that mattered so much when I hadn't paid attention to that sort of thing before. And Oxford was this great, nurturing, here's what is wonderful about this town. Of all the writers in it, they're taking care of their own stuff because there's very little jealousy. Everybody else wants everybody else to succeed. It's not like your success encroaches on yours or Tommy's or anybody else's. And so I'm incredibly grateful for that opportunity. And I am not about to say what I wrote was literature at all.
Oh, come on.
But no, I don't think it was. But I was able to spend a decade, sometimes maybe more like 15 years, perfecting that craft and having the benefit of great mentors in order to tell the story in the best way that I could tell it.
Neil's book is in the Sanctuary of Outcasts, a memoir, and it says that he decided to get through his prison term by pretending to be an undercover reporter.
Well, even George Plimpton couldn't weasel his way into a prison leprosarium, and so...
So who were you more afraid of, at least at the outset, the leprosy folks or the inmates?
Oh, initially the leprosy patients. I knew I could get through a minimum security prison sentence. I mean, my roommates were a banker and a doctor. But I thought if I got leprosy, my life was over. I'll never be able to touch my kids again or anything like that. So I was terrified of that, but not for long. We had an interlibrary loan program, and I'm kind of a nerd. I went and got all the books and figured out that most people who don't have compromised immunity, 95% have a natural resistance. So pretty soon I became really close friends with them. And I was rarely afraid for my physical well-being there. This was, again, non-violent for the most part. And so I had the benefit of not being afraid for my physical safety. And when that security is there, you can sort of work on yourself, which is one of the problems with the state system, I think.
You said you lost your wife, you lost your reputation, but you gained important lessons in life. What were they?
I've obviously forgotten. There's so many, and I don't presume that anybody else will get anything from this, but I think for me, there were two that really resonate. The first is, I don't have to have the answers. I don't have to succeed. That power of just surrender, I need help, I'm going to fail, is the most freeing thing in the world. I remember coming back here thinking, I'll never be asked to be on the board of directors of a bank. I'll never be asked to be on the vestry of church. I'll never be asked to handle anybody's money or be in an important position. It was like, damn, I'm free. I can go to the movie at 2:30 in the afternoon if I want to. And the other that for me was sort of eye-opening and is that those friends who are most worth having, they're covered with scars.
Well, Neil, you were brave to write a very personal memoir, and I think, Beth Ann, you were brave to write in your books about your own situation as it related to motherhood, very frankly, entertainingly. And I wonder from you and then from Neil, does it take a lot of courage to write in such a personal way for everybody?
I don't know how Neil would answer, but I would have to say it doesn't, for me, take courage to write it, because when I'm writing it, I'm not thinking about anyone reading it. I'm just driven to get something out. There does come a point later when I think, ooh, should I publish this? And, ultimately I feel like if I have done honor to the experience, even if it was an unpleasant experience, or I don't look particularly salacious in it, whatever the situation is, that if it's honest, it's okay.
She wrote a wonderful book, I've got it here, Tender Hooks, and it's about how her life and her husband's life changed after the birth of their child. And it's very good. And then she's written other personal poems in Unmentionables. And so you're a memorist as well as a poet. You said you had to wait a number of years before you decided to write your book, Neil.
Yeah, well, it was not about so much fear of exposure. I believe with what Beth Ann does, those things that you shouldn't tell anybody or have no business telling are the only things worth writing about if you're a memoirist. You don't do it for shock value. It has to have meaning. It has to move the story forward. But I remember hearing you read at Bernard Observatory that first time about your experience with Claire and how you wanted to see what the inside of her mouth felt like. That was an incredibly moving poem. If y'all haven't heard it, go buy the book. I took so much time to write my book because I'm really slow in discovering meaning, and I was searching for that. And I also I always wanted to write the book, but I wasn't sure it should ever be published because I'd been so reckless before. Writing about other people when they're still alive and there's conflict is pretty treacherous territory. I don't know if you encountered this with family or friends, but I didn't want to re-injure anybody by telling this story again. And over 15 years, a lot of people, there seemed to be some healing. A lot of people died.
Well, you changed the names. You're some undercover reporter.
Well, I changed the names of people who were still alive who had a physical ailment and inmates who were still alive and in prison who have all the time in the world to sue anyone for any reason.
Good thinking.
But we kept a lot of the same names.
Beth Ann, I can't do this justice if I read it, but talking about what other people will think, she wrote a poem in her book, Unmentionables, that is called Because People Ask What My Daughter Will Think of My Poems When She's 16. Should I read it or can you read it?
Yeah, sure, I can read it.
Great.
Because people will ask what my daughter will think of my poems when she's 16. Daughter, the light of the future is apricot, and in it you are not the thy child, pointing her earnest index finger to the yellow balloons clearing the willows and drifting higher. You're the balloon. I'm the grasping hand. Or I'm the ooh in balloon. I'll meet you there. I'm the brown strings, formerly violets, you didn't water. I'm the hole in the photo. You're the unsafety scissors. I'm the lint in the corners of my purse after you steal the change. Brown bag lunch you pitch after leaving my house. Buttons you undo after I've okayed your blouse. Poems you burn in the sink. Poems that had to go and use your name. Never mind that soon you'd be 16. Hate your name. I'm the resemblance you deny. Fat ass you hope your boyfriends never see. I'll meet you there. That is my promise and my threat. With this yellow balloon as my witness. Even if I'm dead, I'll meet you there.
Beautiful. It's beautiful, and I shudder to think that I might have read it instead of her. Richard, I read one profile, I think it was in New Yorker. It said, Square Books is what put Oxford over the line. If Square Books were to vanish tomorrow, Oxford would still be a very nice college town, but its magic would be harder to find. I read another profile that was in the New York Times, and it talked about, the whole story was on the hospitality abilities of Richard and Lisa, and how all these people come in not just to speak at Square Books, but then they stay at his house, his and Lisa's house. And it's like a bed and breakfast for literary giants. And one of the authors was quoted that Richard and Lisa's house is the epicenter of the literary South. That's quite good praise.
That was a writer who had probably had a lot to drink.
Well, one of the themes of that story was how much was available. So tell us how it is having these famous authors come and stay, and what insights do you get into them that we might not otherwise have?
Well, that just actually grows out of trying to help, in most cases, the publishers who are underwriting the expense of sending the author here a night of a hotel bill, and we've
Back before we had any hotels here.
well, that too, and you know, we've got a large house. We didn't mean to have a large house. We just happened to have a large house, and our children are all grown and gone, so we got all kinds of room to erase that from this tape or whatever.
You know,
So-
while you're talking about that, you know, some women are a little uptight when they have visitors come in that they want everything to be perfect. And Lisa was quoted as talking about her her light housekeeping, and she don't worry a whole lot about having everything perfect.
That's a big lie. That's all that is.
Okay, tell us about that. Who's the most memorable person who spent the night at your house? Memorable to you?
Well, there've been a lot of great writers and famous writers and that sort of thing. And but you know, one of the great things about my job in this business is that writers they're people who sit behind sit on a keypad, or you know, they're alone. They're living inside their own heads a lot of the time, and they have time to sort of figure a lot of things out, and they're invariably, not invariably, but almost invariably, really nice, sensitive, good company, good people, fun to have around, good conversation, you know, what have you. James Dickey, now that he's deceased, I guess I can talk about. He was pretty memorable.
In what way?
Well, in a lot of ways, it's known that he, you know, at times in his life had a problem drinking, and he did on one occasion. He came to Oxford several times, but when our children were small, he came one time and he brought his guitar, and he told them ghost stories and played songs to them, and he was just amazed. They were just completely amazed by him. But then as the day went on and more drinking went on or whatever, he ended up having to come home early, and I've kind of worked myself into a
You did.
corner.
He's dead.
Well, how should I say this? I don't know. He made an impression that I just don't want to go into. That's all I can say.
You went down the road. I didn't take you there, but
Yeah.
Was that the same night he ate the bowl of tartar sauce at
No,
Taylor
that was
Catfish?
actually a
Okay.
different occasion. That was we went out to Taylor, to the Catfish restaurant, and it was a large group, and Willie was involved, and Dickie again had a fair amount to drink, and and Willie had got up and left the table, and Dickie started accusing us as his friends of not helping Willie keep from drinking as much as he did, and saying that Willie was drinking too much and y'all need to do something, y'all should be ashamed, and so forth and so on. And he was giving us this lecture, and of course Dickie had been drinking, and he was the whole time he was lecturing us, he was eating with a spoon the tartar sauce that was on the table, and he finally reached a point where he paused and he says, "This soup sure is good."
Oh.
True story.
and therein lies the literary tradition of Oxford.
Well, Dickie, I'll say this about Dickie, and I've seen him read. I saw him when I was in Washington. I saw him read at the Library of Congress. He was a former consultant, poetry consultant to the Library of Congress, which is what is now Poet Laureate of the United States. And I thought that he'd had too much to drink at that event, and he gave the finest reading of a poem that I've ever heard. And I also know that these sort of stories about him, he liked to sort of cultivate these stories. And so I think he did a lot of this sort of stuff just to kind of get a reaction and to have these stories told about him and create this kind of
Willie did a lot of that, too.
legend. Willie did some of that, yeah.
I know that John Grisham holds Square Books and you in a special place. Can you talk about the beginning there and how how it is that he still gives favor to Square Books.
Well, yeah, I think everybody knows that his first book was published by a very small press. I mean, it was a press that basically just almost didn't exist. It was primarily a religious book publisher, Fleming Revel, that had started a trade imprint called Winwood Books, and John's book was the first book. They'd hired this editor from New York who had actually gone through some drinking problems of his own and sort of straightened himself up. He's coming back to the surface or whatever. He published Stephen King's first book, and he found John had sent his manuscript to something like 20 publishers and agents, and it kept coming back. And this one guy took it, and but they really had no market reach or penetration. This company didn't, and John, because he'd gone to law school here and he knew about the bookstore, he, through a friend, set up an introduction with me, which he didn't need to do. I mean, he could have just come in the store. And he told me that this publisher had accepted a book, and I said, great. And he looked at me, he said, and I want you to sell 500 copies. Well, at that time, we hadn't sold 500 copies of anything. and I told him, I said, look, you know, when this has got to happen, this has got to happen. We're not going to sell 500 copies, you know, and so forth and so on. And I said, and furthermore, I haven't read your book. If we're going to sell your book, some of us who work here are going to have to develop some enthusiasm for it. And he said, okay. And so the next day he drove back and handed me a loose leaf typescript of the novel. And I went, oh man, what did I asked for it? And so, but I took it home, started reading it, and I said, this is something, he's got something, you know. And so anyway, we tried to help promote the book from the very beginning. I sent out one of these postcards, which I had handwritten and then got the printer to copy. He asked me to do this, and I said, if you pay for the cards, I'll pay for the postage. We sent this card out, and I told people that this lawyer guy who thought he was going to be the next great Mississippi writer came to see me, and I kind of laughed at him, and then I took the book home, and now I think he may be the next great Mississippi writer. And I said it's a better book than Pete Dexter's Paris Trout, which had won the National Book Award that year. At that time, I didn't really know how to promote a big commercial writer like John. I'm always looking for kind of a literary thing. And I didn't tell him this, but I didn't much like Paris Trout.
So it's an easy comparison.
It was an easy comparison, but I did like the book, and we did work hard to sell it. And I also wrote some of my book-selling friends and said, you're not going to find out about this guy, but here's this book. And so I tried to help him in that way. And so he's more than paid back.
Did you sell 500 books?
Eventually, yeah. At his signing, we sold, I think, 50 or 51 copies.
But he doesn't do many signings now, but he does with Square Books, doesn't he?
Well, he now sends us signed copies.
Yeah.
He doesn't do any more personal things because it just kind of got to be we couldn't figure out a way to keep it from being a zoo and taking a whole lot of time. And
Those 50 copies that sold, what are they worth now?
Yeah.
I think they're like $5,000.
Mm. So we couldn't have you here, Richard, and not talk about the whole change in the way books are sold and purchased. I've read an interesting story about how you and Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon, which is the arch enemy of bookstores, actually have been together. You want to tell us about how you and Jeff Bezos got together and what you think of him now?
Well, the American Booksellers Association, which I had a long involvement with, had these things called bookseller schools where people who were thinking about opening a bookstore, or maybe they'd opened a bookstore and they wanted to sharpen their business skills or whatever. It was a 3 or 4 day program, and I was on the faculty of one of those schools. There were 4 booksellers who taught, and there were usually 40 or 50 people in the thing. This one was in Portland, Oregon in 1994. And there was a young man in that class, and you kind of get to know everybody. You know what their business plan is, where they want to open a store. You kind of, because you eat together and you go to the bar together, and you sort of get to know everybody. But this young guy kind of couldn't quite figure out what his business plan. And a lot of people are secretive. They think you're going to come open a store in their town before they do or something. So a lot of people don't want to show all their cards. But this young man, I never could quite figure him out. So on the last day, when everybody was kind of packing up and leaving, I went and I sat down with him and I said, I haven't figured out exactly what you're going to do or where you're going to do it, but I have a feeling you're going to be successful. And he just kind of laughed and went about his business. Of course, I didn't remember who that was, or I didn't even think about him until several years later at one of the national conventions. I saw this familiar face, and I thought it was somebody from Oxford that I just couldn't quite, it was out of context, and I was like, who's this guy? You know how it is, you see somebody, you don't know their name, you can't remember exactly who they are, but I was playing along, great to see you, it's nice to see you. How you been? How's business? Oh, it's great, so forth and so on. And then I noticed on this shirt thing, this little writing, Amazon.com. And I looked at him and I said, oh my God, it's you. And he just threw his head back and laughed, that funny laugh he has. And
So the takeaway from this evening is that Richard discovered John Grisham and Jeff Bezos.
I'm like some sort of cartoon figure in history or something.
So all kidding aside, around the country, bookstores are struggling. I wouldn't apply that adjective to your bookstore. What's the difference in Square Books and the struggles that everybody else is having?
The book business is a very complicated business. You have hundreds of thousands of different products, if you will, coming out each year. Each one is distinctly different from the other. They have a very short shelf life for the most part. And there's no way you can possibly read them all and understand them. So the whole business of sort of figuring out your products, if you will, is very complicated. And then it's also a business where every book you see, it's got the publisher's printed price on it. So our price is always a discount from the publisher off that price. So the prices are somewhat controlled. You can't go over those prices. Some people could. And this is why bookstores can't make it in places like New York, because the rents are so high. There's no way in this pricing schematic that it's possible for a bookstore in New York, for the most part, to do it. So, so they're thin margins. It's a complicated business. It's retail, which is also complicated and wearing. So it's hard for everybody. It's hard for everybody, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Borders, whoever. It's hard for those people. They're getting better terms from the publishers and so forth. I don't want to really kind of go into that. So they can do a little bit better. But I think for Amazon, he's just using books as a way to get into all sorts of other things, which he's done. I understand that the reason he started with books is because of the International Standard Book Number, that 13 digit that's in every book that the Library of Congress started. It used to be 10 digits, decades ago, because the products are distinctly identifiable and it's perfectly suited to algorithms and of computing. And so it's difficult for us still. It's always been difficult. I think it's difficult for everybody, but it's possible and it's immensely rewarding. I bought the building that our main store is in 1984. I bought the Off Square in 2003. I owned 18% of Square Books Junior property. I knew both just instinctively that maybe the best or only way I could survive was to control my rent and by owning the property that I occupied. So that's kind of helped me a lot, and I was able to buy the building in 1984 when the prices on the square are nothing like what they are today. I couldn't afford it today, and I couldn't afford to rent it today. So businesses that can fudge some kind of a way like that can survive. Others, if they're sharp business people and good booksellers, they can make it. But I'm telling you, it's going to be hard for the big boys to really succeed. It's tough business.
Yep. Yep. I want to invite our audience now to join in this conversation. And so we'll take questions from the floor as you're getting your courage or your question together. One last thing, Richard, the very first thing you mentioned when you started your bookstore seems to me to still be the important thing, and that is loyal people.
Right.
And you have done more than anybody I know here in Oxford to build a personal loyalty, which has to translate into some success for Square Books.
One likes to think so, but one also knows that that you can never bank on that loyalty, and you have to earn it every day anew.
Okay, who will ask the first question? Yes, ma'am.
Somebody can talk about the climate of readers in Oxford that is loyal to you. And
That's right.
Does care about Beth Ann's work.
That's true.
How were they developed? Was it the university, or did you do it?
No, I didn't do that. We didn't do that. There were, this is a university community, the home of William Faulkner, in the state of Mississippi that's produced more great writers than any state in the country. People here are proud of their writers, proud of people like Beth Ann and Neil, and support them as much as they support me. And so you have a lot of, you got a lot of smart folks around here who like to read.
That's right.
Good for us.
Beth Ann, you feel that loyalty?
Yes, so I would say that the two things Oxford has is the past and the present, and then hopefully the future. But the past, because of Faulkner and the literary tradition, we do feel like, okay, so in Mississippi, highest teenage pregnancy rate in the country, highest illiteracy rate in the country, second highest incarceration rate in the country, yet highest number of Pulitzer Prize winning authors. So let's take this great thing that we're all so proud of, and how are we going to move it into the future? And Richard's being modest, but really so much of it has circled around Square Books and been born from Square Books and has spread from Square Books. And so just a brief story, we hadn't lived here long when Jamie Cornegay, who was a manager, said, this guy, Richard Flanagan, he's a Tasmanian novelist, y'all need to come hear him. Never heard of him before. Went to the reading, and Richard Flanagan told this amazing story of flying from Australia to the United States. He's going on 40-city book tour, and the guy at customs says, what's your local address? You're going to be in our country for 3 months. What's your local address? And Flanagan said, oh, no, I don't have a local address. I'm going to a different city every day. And he said, no, what's your local address? And Flanagan said, no, I'm sorry, sir, you don't really understand. I'm going to a different city, a different hotel. I don't have. And he said, what's your local address? He said, Square Books. And the man wrote Square Books, Oxford, Mississippi, on his luggage that went all over the country for 3 months. So what is it that makes writers feel like this is their spiritual home? And something I think of in my own life, I was mentioning moving here in 2001 when my daughter was 2 months old, and Tommy was teaching, I was home, and then September 11th happened. And I remember just being home with the baby and just crying. And after hours of watching the terrible TV coverage, feeling like I needed to get out of the house and I needed to be with people, and I just put her in the stroller and I walked, and I didn't even know where I was going. I was, like we all were, just so distraught. And I just found myself at Square Books, and there were many people there. And we weren't talking to each other, but we all felt like we need to be with our tribe. And, so when you said earlier, is talking about Oxford like talking about, the Vatican? I mean, in a way, isn't that a cathedral? When you want to go there like you go to a church. For readers, I think it is a type of cathedral.
Great.
Absolutely. And I'll add something else that Richard doesn't brag about, but people go to these MFA programs all over the country in the middle of nowhere in Iowa, and they'll brag about bringing 30 writers in a year to speak to students. And Richard hosts probably 150 to 180 readings a year. I'm not saying that they're all qualified to teach creative writing, but 40 or 50 of them probably are. And we have the benefit of going there absolutely free, asking them any question we want, hearing them read from their latest work, talking to them about their award-winning work, and that sense of community and that thing that he and his staff bring to this town is absolutely invaluable. And those of you who live here and don't go, start going. I mean, you don't know what you're missing. It's absolutely, every 2 weeks there's magic that happens there.
You're preaching to the choir. 5:30 on Friday afternoon. Is over here.
Yeah.
Who has another question? Billy.
So, Richard, how does your sales fluctuate with the football season? Or, I mean, in other words, my guess is that there are a lot of out-of-town visitors who also increase your sales. I know the local community is certainly supportive.
Right.
But I'm kind of, has Hugh Freeze done you a lot of good because the football team's doing better, or,
Only when he's winning. No, I mean, yes, all of that, plays into our customer base, if you will. And, I knew before I opened the store, because my parents' home was across the street from Roanoke, and people would occasionally wander up into our yard looking for Roanoke, and they could be from Africa or Japan or whatever. There were people from all over the world who came here just to sort of check out Yoknapatawpha. So there have always been literary tourists, if you will. But yes, also the crowds that come for the ball games, and now the thing is the crowds that come to avoid the weekends of the ball games. And, because they think there are not going to be as many people in town. So it's great that we have so many people, a lot of former students and tourists. They're Europeans who stop here on their way to the Delta to do the blues tour. There's a lot of folks that come through this neck of the woods. Yeah.
Yes, Dick.
Charles, a question for Neil. You're a publisher too. Kind of break down the current business model of publishing. How do you make a margin in this business?
We really count on Richard to sell everything. That's pretty much it.
You're in big trouble.
It's a tough thing because, I love great story as much as anybody. Unfortunately, the first question I have to ask when I consider a project, and we turn down 97, 98% of those pitched to us, is can we find the readers for this? Can we make some money? And I wish it weren't the first question, but to be in business it is. Then the second question, which is equally valuable, is this work really great, or can it be made really good? And then when those two questions are both yes, then you start the work of developing a book. And we publish anywhere from 5 to 10 books a year, and I don't want a book. If you walk in and say, everybody in America wants to read this book, it's like, go find a big publisher. I want to know that it's a tiny market who gathers together, who has a real special interest in it, so we can find those readers and direct them to go to Square Books or Lemuria. And so that's how we decide. I had a gambler's issue. The first book I ever published was a coffee table book called Mississippians, and it was all the famous, notable, extraordinary Mississippians, and we sold 10,000 copies in 1 year. It was a $45 book. I don't know how many y'all sold, Richard, but
Lots.
okay. And I thought, boy, this is going to be easy, and it has not been since.
Yeah.
You were nice enough to put my picture in there, and Andrea bought 9,500.
Charles, we cut that deal way before we decided to put you in there. Of course, I'm kidding. So deserving. The problem was, who do we leave out? Because of the 300 or so individuals that we put in there, our standard was you have to have done something that nobody else has done. So not every governor, every senator was in there, and what you've done throughout your career. With the Pulitzer team and the people you've nurtured and brought into this great journalism with the Freedom Forum, and this you were deserving like nobody else in that journalism category. But it was tough. You would be embarrassed to know the people who call saying, "Can I be in the next edition?"
Oh.
It's like, no. You have to ask.
All right. Who else? Yes, sir.
Given the great literary tradition of Mississippi and Oxford, and the fact that it's attractive now to people to come here and develop their writing skills, has there ever been anything developed to exploit that in terms of an actual incubator program that would bring writers here for the purpose of developing this?
Beth Ann?
Yeah, so there's small things that happen in town like summer workshops, but really the main focus of the university is the Master of Fine Arts program in creative writing, and that I'm really honored to be the director of. And so my job here at the university, I teach both undergraduates and graduates, and my teaching experience is really bifurcated, and both parts are wonderful because I'm teaching a lot of these, Mississippi undergraduates who just come with such a natural talent and an ability to tell stories. A lot of times they haven't read enough, and sometimes they haven't traveled enough, or they need their ideas like gently expanded in a not threatening way. But what you're able to get out of them is like so awesome and really fulfilling. Then I also teach graduate students, and they're students who've come from all over the country. We get over 200 applications, actually closer to 250, for 8 spots. Wow. And all of the students are fully funded, which is to say they get their classes for free, and then they teach, like a freshman composition situation usually, and they're doing incredible work. I have a couple here. I'm just going to embarrass them, but look at these 3 babies. So Molly Brown just got her first book of poems accepted. Put your hand up, Molly. This is so embarrassing. She's going to hate me later. Yeah, she's a John Grisham Fellow, so Grisham gave us money to take care of a couple of our students, and from Virginia, just got her first book accepted. It's going to come out next year. Next to her is Kate Sparks. Put your hand up, Kate. And Jason Molesky. They're about to get married. In 2 weeks, they're getting married. And they can't decide where to go because poor Jason has only gotten offers for PhD programs full offers from maybe like 5 or 6 places. So is it Princeton that he should go to or Yale? Poor boy, he can't decide. So if anyone has some advice, and Kate is working on an awesome project, really, really good fiction, and so they're, like a rock star couple, and where are they going to be in 10 years? You guys might even just write down their names. And then 10 years from now, you can be like, I was in the room with them. So it's really an honor. As you can see, it makes me like I'm sweating now, like talking about, how great it is to work with the students. And so, when I talked about the past and the present, like that is the future, actually, is working with these like really smart brains who are hungry for reading and hungry for events and are taking great risks in their work and, risking failure and absolutely accepting the vow of poverty to do it.
Who else? I'll take one last question. Yes, ma'am. Susan.
Neil, is your book going into production for a movie?
Oh, Lord, I have no idea. It's been optioned, but the producer sent out a press release that made it sound like it was about to be made. There's no good script, no actor, no director, no money, so we've got a long way to go.
Well, Neil, Beth Ann, Richard, you make us proud to be able to be a part of this literary tradition. Thank you for helping to create it.
Thank you.